The small diner sat on the corner of a busy street, a place where life never seemed to slow down. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee and warm pies filled the air, mixed with the faint sound of sizzling bacon from the kitchen. The booths were old but clean, their red leather seats shining under the yellow lights. Every morning, workers, travelers, and even families came in, seeking comfort in a hot meal and the simple kindness of the people who worked there. It was not a fancy place, but it was honest, and it carried a charm that only regular folks seemed to understand. Among the staff was Jasmine, a young woman with quiet strength. She was not one to draw attention to herself. Her uniform was simple, her hair always tied back neatly, and her smile soft yet welcoming. She was a waitress, moving quickly from one table to another, balancing trays of plates and cups with practiced ease. Many didn't notice her beyond the service she provided. To some customers, she was invisible, just another person in the background. To others, she was someone to complain to if their coffee was too cold or their eggs weren't cooked the way they liked. Yet Jasmine never allowed their harshness to touch her heart. She had learned to stay calm, to remain polite, and to carry herself with dignity no matter what came her way. The morning had begun like any other. Regulars sat by the windows, sipping their coffee and reading newspapers. A group of young mechanics laughed at a table in the back, their hands still stained with grease from the early shift. A mother tried to calm her toddler while waiting for pancakes, and an older couple enjoyed their quiet routine of shared toast and black coffee. Jasmine moved between them all, making sure everyone was served. She had already refilled the coffee pot twice, and though her legs were tired, she kept her pace steady. She was used to long hours. She had faced harder days than this. The bell above the door suddenly rang louder than usual, and the mood inside shifted. A tall man in an expensive suit walked in, his shoes polished until they shined like mirrors. Behind him came two other men dressed sharply, and together they filled the small diner with an air of importance that felt out of place. Their laughter was loud, their voices confident, as if they owned not just the room but the very air others breathed. They walked past the waiting customers without so much as a glance, heading straight for the largest booth near the middle of the diner. The man in front was someone people in the city whispered about. A millionaire, known for his wealth and his bold personality, he had a reputation for being arrogant. He was the kind of man who believed money solved everything, and his attitude often showed it. He spoke loudly on his phone, ignoring the stares of people around him, and when he finally put it away, he looked around the diner as though it was beneath him. Jasmine noticed the way the other customers reacted. Some grew quiet, others shook their heads, and a few whispered to each other about who had just walked in. She carried her notepad and walked toward the booth, her steps even, her expression calm. She treated him no differently from any other customer. That was her rule: respect everyone, no matter who they were. "Good morning," she said kindly. "What can I get you today?" The millionaire leaned back in the booth, studying her with eyes that carried no warmth. "Coffee," he said, his voice sharp, as if even the word was a command. "And make sure it's hot. None of that weak stuff you usually serve." His companions laughed, their voices mocking, though they had only been in the diner for less than a minute. Jasmine nodded politely, writing it down. "Of course. I'll bring it right away," she replied. She didn't flinch at his tone, nor did she show irritation. Years of dealing with difficult customers had taught her to keep her composure. She walked back to the counter, poured the steaming coffee into cups, and returned with a steady hand. She placed the cups on the table gently, as she did with all her customers. But the millionaire wasn't finished. He picked up the cup, sipped it, and made a show of frowning. "Too hot," he muttered loudly. "Do you people ever get anything right?" He set the cup back down harder than necessary, making some of the liquid spill onto the saucer. His companions laughed again, shaking their heads as if Jasmine's small mistake had entertained them greatly. Jasmine simply nodded and offered, I'll bring you some cream to cool it down. She turned to leave, but his words followed her. Don't bother. Just bring me the menu. And hurry this time. The diner had grown quieter, the laughter of the mechanics dimmed, the clinking of forks against plates slowed. People watched, some with curiosity, others with disapproval. Yet Jasmine remained composed. She brought the menu, set it on the table, and gave him space to look through it. Her patience was stronger than his arrogance, though most people couldn't see it yet. Minutes passed, and the millionaire kept raising his voice, calling Jasmine back again and again for trivial things. Add more sugar, he ordered once. Not this kind, bring the other packets, he demanded another time. Each time, Jasmine responded with the same calm, moving quickly but without rushing, doing her job with quiet grace. She did not let his tone break her rhythm. At one point, he leaned back and looked around the diner. This place is too small, he said to his companions, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. I don't know how people eat here every day. It feels like I'm lowering myself just by sitting here. His companions chuckled, nodding as if they agreed. Jasmine heard the words but said nothing. She knew better than to let insults reach her heart. The diner might not be grand, but it was honest. It had given her a job when she needed one. To her, this place mattered. Still, the tension grew. The customers who once enjoyed their quiet meals were now watching closely, uncomfortable with the way the millionaire spoke and acted. They didn't like the way he treated Jasmine, but none of them said a word. The air was heavy, thick with silence broken only by his arrogant laughter. Jasmine, however, carried on. She refilled cups, served plates, and cleaned tables, never once allowing her spirit to falter. On the surface, she was just a waitress serving food, but deep inside, she carried something more, something none of them could see yet. As the millionaire grew louder, his confidence filled the room. He thought he was in control. He thought Jasmine was just a simple waitress who would bow to his every word. He didn't know the truth about her, the story hidden beneath her quiet smile. And he had no idea that before the day ended, a single moment would change the way everyone in that diner saw her forever. The diner's atmosphere had shifted. What had begun as an ordinary morning now felt like a stage where everyone was forced to watch a play they had not signed up for. The millionaire, seated in the center booth like a king at his throne, carried on with his loud voice and dismissive laughter. His companions followed his lead, smirking and whispering to each other, amused by his arrogance. Jasmine continued her work, calm as ever. She moved from one table to another, tending to her regular customers, offering quiet smiles to those who looked uncomfortable, and making sure no one else felt neglected. But every few minutes, she was summoned back to the millionaire's booth. He treated the small diner as if it was his personal property, and Jasmine as if she was there only for his amusement. Hey, waitress, his sharp voice rang out again. He tapped the table with a fork, the sound echoing through the silence. This plate is too cold. Do you expect me to eat food like this? Jasmine glanced at the plate. The food was perfectly fine, steam still rose from it, but she said nothing of that. Instead, she lifted the dish gently, her expression composed, and replied, I'll warm it up for you, sir. As she walked toward the kitchen, she heard him chuckle to his companions. Unbelievable. These places never get it right. That's why I usually avoid them. But today I thought, why not? Let's see how ordinary people eat. The words carried easily through the quiet diner. Several customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A young man at the counter clenched his jaw, and the older couple in the corner exchanged looks of disapproval. But Jasmine, though she heard every word, stayed steady. She had faced harder challenges than rude remarks. When she returned with the warmed dish, she set it down with her usual grace. The millionaire did not thank her. Instead, he picked up his fork and made a show of poking at the food, then pushed the plate slightly away. "Better," he said, his voice flat. "But not great. I expected more." Jasmine simply nodded and turned to check on another table. But she had barely walked a few steps when his voice called out again. "Waitress! Come back here." She stopped and returned, her notepad still in hand. "Yes, sir." He leaned back in his booth, studying her in a way that made the air heavy with tension. "Do you enjoy this job?" he asked suddenly, loud enough for others to hear. "Running around for a few dollars in tips? Serving strangers who don't even remember your name?" A hush fell over the diner. Everyone knew this wasn't about food anymore. He was testing her, trying to embarrass her, trying to make himself look powerful at her expense. Jasmine held her ground, her voice calm. "I do my best, sir. My work is honest. That's enough for me." Her answer was simple, yet it carried weight. The older man at the counter lifted his head slightly, as though impressed by her calm. But the millionaire laughed, shaking his head. "Honest work? That's what people say when they have nothing else. You should thank me for even sitting here. My watch," he lifted his wrist for all to see, "costs more than what you probably make in a year. And yet here you are, pretending this job gives you dignity." His companions laughed loudly, enjoying the performance. But the other customers did not. The mother with the toddler pulled her child closer, frowning. The mechanics in the back exchanged glances, their earlier joy replaced with quiet anger. Even the cook peered out from the kitchen window, his brow furrowed. Still, Jasmine did not waver. "Sir," she said softly, "everyone has their own path. Yours is different from mine." Her words, though calm, seemed to irritate him further. He leaned forward, his face tightening with a smile that wasn't friendly. "Different path? Don't make it sound noble. You're here because you don't have a choice. People like me, we have choices. We decide where to go, what to buy, who to meet. That's the difference between us. I live in power. You live in service." The silence in the diner grew heavier. No one dared to interrupt, but all eyes were fixed on the booth. Jasmine felt the weight of those stares, but she stood steady, her tray still balanced in her hand. Then came the moment that would change everything. The millionaire, perhaps in a surge of arrogance, reached out suddenly and tugged at the edge of Jasmine's uniform shirt. The fabric strained under his grip and tore slightly near the shoulder. It wasn't a complete rip, but enough to shock the room. Gasps filled the diner, forks paused halfway to mouths, and even his companions looked momentarily stunned. Jasmine froze, her eyes steady but her breath catching for a brief second. She did not yell, nor did she lash out. Instead, she straightened herself, taking a step back from the booth. The diner was utterly silent. Every customer, every staff member, every pair of eyes was locked on Jasmine. And that was when they saw it. Beneath the torn fabric, on her shoulder, was a tattoo. It wasn't a simple flower or a decorative design. It was bold, sharp, and instantly recognizable to those who understood. A symbol carved in ink that carried history, sacrifice, and pride. The kind of tattoo that wasn't just art but a mark of service and honor. The veteran at the counter was the first to react. His eyes widened, and he stood slowly, his lips parting in disbelief. That's a unit mark," he whispered, his voice trembling with recognition. Others leaned forward, trying to get a better look. The mechanics dropped their forks, staring. Even the diner owner stepped out from behind the register, his expression frozen in surprise. The millionaire, still seated in the booth, looked around in confusion. He didn't understand why the room had changed so suddenly, why the silence now carried not discomfort but awe. Jasmine, though, remained composed. She gently pulled her torn shirt back into place, but the tattoo had already been seen. Its meaning hung in the air like a banner. For the first time that morning, it wasn't the millionaire's voice that filled the diner. It was the weight of unspoken respect that pressed against the walls. And though Jasmine said nothing, the room already knew, she was not just a waitress. She carried a story far greater than anyone had imagined. The millionaire leaned back slowly, his arrogance faltering, his laughter gone. His companions glanced at each other, unsure. And the customers, who had moments ago been silent in discomfort, now stared at Jasmine with new eyes. The diner had gone silent not because of fear, but because of recognition. Something had been revealed that no one could ignore. The silence inside the diner stretched on for long seconds, heavy enough that even the faint hum of the refrigerator and the clatter of dishes in the kitchen seemed louder than usual. Every pair of eyes had turned toward Jasmine. The torn fabric of her uniform had slipped just enough to reveal what lay beneath. The tattoo was clear, bold, and unmistakable. It was not the kind of tattoo people got for style or decoration. It was a mark of belonging to something greater, something few could ever understand. The sharp lines and emblem carried weight. To ordinary eyes, it might have looked unusual. But to those who knew, it meant everything. The older man at the counter was the first to break the silence. His hands trembled slightly as he pushed himself to his feet. He was a veteran, his posture still carrying echoes of the discipline he once lived by. His voice, though quiet, carried through the room. "That's no ordinary tattoo," he said slowly. "That's a special forces insignia." A murmur rippled through the diner. People leaned closer, whispering to one another. A mechanic at the back gasped, his eyes wide. The mother with the toddler covered her mouth in shock. Even the older couple in the corner looked at Jasmine with awe. Jasmine stood still, her tray still in her hand, her face calm but her eyes steady. She hadn't planned for this moment. She hadn't expected her past to be revealed in such a way. Yet now, standing under the weight of dozens of eyes, she understood there was no going back. The millionaire, sitting at the booth, frowned in confusion. He looked from Jasmine to the other customers, clearly not understanding why everyone had gone silent. "What?" he demanded. "It's just ink. Why's everyone acting like it means something?" The veteran turned toward him, his face stern. "That's not just ink. That's the mark of someone who has served their country in one of the toughest, most dangerous units. People with that mark don't just live ordinary lives. They've seen things, done things, and sacrificed in ways you couldn't even imagine." The millionaire blinked, clearly uncomfortable. His companions shifted in their seats, no longer laughing. They glanced at each other uneasily, sensing the change in the air. The veteran slowly turned back to Jasmine. His voice softened, but it was full of respect. "You served." Jasmine hesitated. She hadn't wanted this part of her life to come into the light. For years, she had chosen silence. But the truth was now out, and hiding it no longer made sense. She gave a small nod. "Yes," she said quietly. The diner erupted in whispers. Some people gasped, others leaned back in their seats in disbelief. A few even applauded softly, unsure of what else to do in the moment. The veteran's eyes filled with emotion. He straightened, bringing his hand to his forehead in a slow, deliberate salute. His voice cracked as he spoke, "Thank you for your service." The weight of those words filled the room. Customers looked at Jasmine not as a simple waitress anymore but as someone extraordinary, someone who had carried burdens most could never understand. Jasmine lowered her gaze, embarrassed by the attention. She had never sought recognition. She had never wanted to stand out. Her goal after leaving the service had been simple: to live quietly, to rebuild, to start again in peace. Working at the diner had been her way of staying grounded. But now, the truth was out, and there was no way to hide it. The millionaire shifted in his seat, his arrogance fading quickly. He looked around, realizing that the room was no longer under his control. The laughter he once commanded had vanished, replaced by an air of respect that belonged entirely to Jasmine. He tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. His companions avoided his eyes. They, too, could feel the change. The room that had once laughed at his jokes now judged him silently. Jasmine finally broke the quiet. She pulled her shirt back into place, covering the tattoo, but the image had already burned itself into everyone's memory. She looked at the veteran, her voice soft. "You don't need to thank me," she said. "I only did what I had to do. I served my time, and I came home. That's all." But the veteran shook his head. "No. People need to thank you. Because without people like you, the rest of us wouldn't be sitting here in peace, drinking coffee, living our lives." A murmur of agreement ran through the diner. Heads nodded, eyes softened, and strangers looked at Jasmine with gratitude. For the first time since she had started working at the diner, Jasmine felt truly seen. Not as just a waitress, not as just another face, but as someone who had carried a story of sacrifice and honor. The millionaire cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "So what? She worked in the military. Big deal. That doesn't change the fact that she's here now, serving food like the rest of them." His words, though meant to sound dismissive, came out weaker than before. He no longer had the crowd's support. A mechanic from the back stood up, his voice firm. "It changes everything. She earned her respect. You don't get to talk down to her." Others joined in, murmuring words of agreement. The millionaire's face reddened, his confidence slipping further. Jasmine, however, raised her hand gently, silencing the room. "Please," she said softly. "I didn't want this to turn into a scene. I just wanted to do my job. That's all." Her humility only deepened the respect people felt for her. The mother with the toddler whispered to her child, pointing at Jasmine. "Look, sweetheart. That's what real strength looks like." The older couple smiled warmly, nodding to each other. The veteran wiped his eyes, overcome with emotion. The millionaire sat in silence, realizing that no amount of money, no expensive suit, no shining watch could erase the respect Jasmine now commanded. He had tried to humiliate her, but in the end, he had only exposed her strength. Jasmine took a deep breath, steadying herself. She hadn't planned to reveal her past, but now that it was out, she stood with dignity. She looked at the customers, at the faces turned toward her, and said, "I'm just Jasmine. I work here. I live here. I don't need anything more than that. But thank you, for your kindness." The room fell into a respectful quiet again. For a long moment, no one moved. And in that silence, the truth was clear: Jasmine was more than they had ever imagined. And though the millionaire sat there, speechless and stripped of his arrogance, Jasmine stood taller than she ever had before. The diner had never felt so heavy with silence, yet so alive with meaning. Every customer, every worker, every set of eyes stayed fixed on Jasmine. The simple waitress they had seen countless times before was no longer just a face in the background. She was someone with a past, a story written in sacrifice and honor, and it had now stepped quietly into the light. Jasmine stood still, her hand gently holding the edge of her shirt where the fabric had torn. Though she had covered the tattoo again, the sight of it lingered in the minds of everyone present. It was a truth no one could unsee. The millionaire shifted in his seat. His once powerful presence had shrunk into something small, almost fragile. He looked around as if searching for support, but there was none left to be found. His companions stared at their plates, embarrassed, unwilling to meet his eyes. The customers who had once kept quiet under his arrogance now looked at him with open judgment. It was Jasmine who finally broke the silence. Her voice was soft, but it carried through the diner with clarity. "I never wanted anyone to know," she said, her gaze steady but humble. "I came here to start over. To live quietly. This job, this diner, it gave me that chance. The veteran at the counter, still standing, nodded solemnly. You've done more than enough. You've earned every bit of respect. Jasmine sighed. Her eyes drifted for a moment, lost in memories. She spoke slowly, carefully choosing her words. Years ago, I served with a unit overseas. We were sent into difficult places, places most people only hear about on the news. We didn't always know if we would come home. Her voice trembled slightly, but she steadied it. Some of my friends didn't. I carry their memory with me every day. That tattoo, it isn't just mine. It's theirs too. The diner grew even quieter, if that were possible. The weight of her words pressed on every heart in the room. The mother with the toddler blinked back tears, clutching her child a little closer. The mechanics lowered their eyes, their earlier frustration melting into deep respect. Even the older couple, who had seen much in their long lives, looked at her as if they were in the presence of something rare and noble. Jasmine continued, her tone soft but filled with conviction. When I came back, I didn't want praise. I didn't want speeches or attention. I just wanted to live. To find peace in small things. Serving coffee, taking orders, listening to people talk about their day, that became enough for me. This diner gave me that life. That's why I'm here. For a long moment, no one moved. Her words touched them in ways they hadn't expected when they had walked in for breakfast that morning. They had come for pancakes and coffee, yet now they found themselves witnesses to something unforgettable. The millionaire, growing desperate, cleared his throat loudly. So what? You used to be someone important. Now you're just a waitress again. Don't expect us to treat you like some kind of hero just because you have a tattoo. His words were sharp, but his voice betrayed him. It was weaker than before, lacking the confidence he once carried. The mechanic at the back slammed his fist lightly against the table, his voice firm. She doesn't have to expect it. She's earned it. And we'll give it to her. Murmurs of agreement spread through the diner. People nodded, some even clapped softly, not for drama but out of genuine respect. The millionaire's face reddened. He had come into the diner expecting to be admired, feared, and served without question. Now he was the one shrinking under the weight of the room's judgment. Jasmine, however, raised her hand slightly, calming the crowd. Please, she said gently. Don't fight with him. He doesn't understand. And maybe that's not his fault. Some people don't know what it means to carry a story like mine. But that's all right. I didn't come here to prove anything to anyone. Her humility only deepened the impact of her words. The veteran at the counter stepped closer, his eyes glistening. You don't need to prove anything. People like you are the reason people like me can still stand tall. You've done enough. Jasmine looked at him with a faint smile, her eyes soft. Thank you. But the truth is, I'm not special. I'm just one of many who served. Some came back, some didn't. I only want to honor them by living quietly. That's why I work here, why I smile at strangers, why I keep moving even on the hard days. It's not about me. It's about them. The words struck deep. Customers who had walked in expecting only a meal now felt their hearts stirred. They saw her not just as a waitress but as a reminder of sacrifice, humility, and quiet strength. The diner owner finally stepped forward. He was a man of few words, but his voice was strong as he spoke. Jasmine, you never told us. But I'm proud to have you here. Proud to call you part of this place. His eyes glistened with sincerity. This diner isn't just a diner anymore. It's a place that's home to someone like you. The customers nodded, their faces warm with approval. The millionaire, watching helplessly, tried once more to assert himself. All of you are fools, he muttered. She's just spinning a story. Don't tell me you actually believe this waitress is more important than me. But this time, no one laughed at his words. No one supported him. The diner stood firmly on Jasmine's side. He was alone, his arrogance stripped bare for everyone to see. Jasmine did not raise her voice, did not fight back. She simply looked at him with calm eyes. "Respect is not bought with money," she said softly. "It is earned by how you live, by how you treat others. You may have wealth, but that doesn't make you greater than anyone here." Her words were like a mirror, reflecting his flaws back at him. The millionaire's lips pressed into a thin line. He had no answer. The room remained still, every heart filled with admiration for Jasmine. She had spoken not with anger, but with quiet truth. And in doing so, she had silenced arrogance with dignity. As the moment settled, the diner felt changed. It was no longer just a place where people ate meals. It had become a place where truth had been revealed, where respect had been restored, and where a simple woman had reminded everyone of what really mattered. The millionaire sat back in his booth, defeated. His companions avoided his gaze, ashamed to have laughed along earlier. And Jasmine, though tired of the sudden spotlight, stood taller than ever before. She had not chosen this moment, but it had chosen her. And in that moment, she proved that true strength does not shout, it speaks softly, yet it shakes the walls around it. The diner remained quiet, though it was no longer the silence of fear or discomfort. It was a silence born from respect, from awe, from the deep weight of realization. Every customer in the room now looked at Jasmine not as they had seen her before, but as someone far greater than they had imagined. The truth had settled into their hearts like a stone dropped into water, rippling outward with lasting effect. Jasmine stood at the center of it all, calm and steady. She had not planned to reveal her past. She had never wanted to stand in the spotlight. But sometimes, truth had its own way of rising to the surface, and once it did, nothing could push it back down. The millionaire shifted uncomfortably in his booth. The arrogance that had filled him earlier was gone, replaced by something far less powerful. His expensive suit, his polished watch, his loud words, all of it felt meaningless now. He looked around, hoping to find even one pair of eyes still on his side, but every gaze was fixed on Jasmine. Finally, he cleared his throat, his voice lower than before. I didn't know," he muttered. "I didn't realize who you were." Jasmine turned her head slightly toward him, her expression still calm. "You don't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect," she said softly. "That should be given to everyone, no matter where they come from, no matter what they've done." The words struck him harder than any insult could have. He lowered his eyes, unable to respond. His companions shifted uneasily, their earlier laughter now feeling like a shameful weight. The veteran at the counter stepped forward again, his voice strong. "She doesn't need your apology. What she deserves, she already has our respect. And that's something you can't buy, no matter how much money you have." A murmur of agreement filled the diner. Customers nodded, some clapped quietly, others simply sat with tears in their eyes. It was not just about Jasmine anymore. It was about the lesson that had unfolded before them. The mother with the toddler leaned close to her child and whispered, "Remember this, sweetheart. It's not money or looks that make someone great. It's their heart, their courage, and how they treat others." The child, though too young to understand fully, nodded and clung tightly to her mother's hand. The diner owner, his voice thick with emotion, stepped forward. "Jasmine, this place is your home as long as you want it. You've always been family to us, but today, everyone here has seen just how extraordinary you really are." Jasmine smiled faintly, humbled by the words. She did not bask in the praise, nor did she look for more. She simply lowered her head slightly and said, "Thank you. But please, don't make this about me. I just want to live quietly, to do my job, and to honor the memory of those who can't be here today. That's enough for me." Her humility deepened the respect in the room. People realized that true greatness did not need a stage, nor did it seek applause. It lived quietly, in the small acts of dignity, in the strength of character, in the way a person carried themselves even when no one was watching. The millionaire rose slowly from the booth, his eyes avoiding Jasmine's. For the first time, he looked smaller than the simple waitress he had mocked. His wealth, his pride, his arrogance, all of it felt useless in that moment. He muttered a few words under his breath, something that might have been an apology, though it was too faint to hear clearly. Without waiting for a response, he gestured to his companions and walked quickly out of the diner. The bell above the door rang as it closed behind him. And just like that, the weight of his presence was gone. The air felt lighter, freer, filled not with tension but with relief. Jasmine stood quietly for a moment, then turned back to her work. She picked up plates, refilled coffee, and smiled softly at the customers who looked at her with new eyes. For her, life had to continue. She was not one to stand in the glow of admiration. She had never sought to be remembered as a hero. She simply wanted to serve with kindness, whether in uniform or in a waitress's apron. But the diner had changed. It would never again be just a place for meals. From that day forward, it carried a story of dignity, humility, and quiet strength. People would whisper about the waitress with the hidden tattoo, the one who had served her country and then chosen to live simply. They would speak of the day arrogance was silenced by truth, the day respect rose above wealth. In the days that followed, word of the incident spread beyond the walls of the diner. Customers who had been present shared what they had seen, their voices filled with admiration. Soon, strangers came to the diner not just for food, but to catch a glimpse of Jasmine. Some came out of curiosity, others to thank her, and many simply to sit in the presence of someone whose strength came not from power but from humility. Jasmine never boasted, never told her full story. She only smiled, served, and lived quietly, just as she always had. But the community changed around her. People grew kinder, more patient, more aware of the importance of treating others with respect. The diner became a place where dignity was remembered, where kindness was valued, and where the simple act of service carried deeper meaning. And Jasmine herself, though she never sought fame, became a symbol. Not of wealth or success, but of something far greater, of resilience, of quiet courage, of the truth that strength is not always loud. Sometimes, it is gentle. Sometimes, it is humble. And sometimes, it walks among us disguised as an ordinary person, until a moment reveals it to the world. The millionaire, meanwhile, became a silent lesson. He never returned to the diner. Those who knew him whispered about the day he had been humbled, the day his wealth could not protect him from the truth. For him, it was a memory he could not erase. For everyone else, it was proof that arrogance will always fall before dignity. As the sun set that evening, the diner's windows glowed warmly. Inside, Jasmine moved from table to table, refilling cups and asking softly if anyone needed more pie. She smiled gently at the veteran, who still sat at the counter, sipping his coffee with pride in his eyes. She waved kindly to the mother and her child, who now looked at her with admiration instead of just familiarity. Life went on. Plates were washed, counters wiped down, and chairs stacked as the day came to an end. But beneath it all, something had changed forever. The diner was no longer just a diner. Jasmine was no longer just a waitress. And everyone who had been there that day carried with them a memory they would never forget, the moment a millionaire tried to belittle a woman, only to discover that she carried more honor in her quiet soul than he could ever hold in all his riches. And so, the story lived on, not in headlines or bright lights, but in the hearts of ordinary people who had seen, with their own eyes, that true greatness walks among us in the most unexpected ways.